let's get the show on the road. Today's the review day, right? Sure. There's one behind you too. So the test, 8 questions. Now some of them have multiple parts, and as you know, some of these questions are kind of lengthy. We have to do a lot of stuff inside them. That's why there's not a lot. You should be able to identify the values of A, C, H, and K from an equation. Should be able to take an equation, describe the transformation in words. I'll give you the criteria. You know, like if A is greater than 0, it's a vertical stretch, that kind of thing. You should be able to calculate the amplitude, midline, period, and frequency from an equation. Should be able to write the equation of a sinusoid from a description. Or you should be able to write the equation of a sinusoid from a graph. Again, I'll tell you the parent function to use. And then you should be able to draw and generate points from or draw a graph and generate the points from an equation, right? So just like these 3 here are basically the homework quiz, right, that we just did with partners. So today, when you're working on reviewing and building out your note card, the way I would formulate my note card is I would basically try to break it up into what stuff I need to know for each kind of problem. So if I have an equation to graph problem, you know, first thing I need to do is find the A, C, H, and K. So I wrote down the general form for that function. And want to remind myself, C is the reciprocal of the coefficient of X. H is the opposite sign it appears. And then make sure to factor before I find H. So just some general stuff I need to remember because those are common mistakes I see myself making. Hypothetically, right? Like I don't make those mistakes, but like it happens. Then I would want to make sure I have the amplitude, midline, period, and frequency formulas. And remember that the period and frequency are different for tangent. Those formulas are different for tangent. And then I would make sure I've written down my transformation map, right? So that was the stuff I needed for graphing. To go from graph to equation, the first thing we'd like to do is we find that midline, and I use that to get the K. The amplitude, I can use that to get absolute value of A, and the period to get the C. Right? So just kind of writing that stuff down, so I remember that. If I'm writing a sine function, the parent function point I use is 0, 0, which is a midline, or minimum midline max point. And I want to compare that to any midline point from the resultant. The x-coordinate from the resultant is our H, and the type of midline point, whether it's the same as this one or different, tells us the sign for A. So I'm again just kind of making notes to myself about what to do and how to do the problem. If I'm doing a cosine, the parent function point I use is 0, 1, which is a maximum, and I compare that to any extreme, either max or min, from the resultant. The x-coordinate from the resultant is my H, and the type of extreme point gives me the sign of A. So if it's a max, A was positive. If it's a min, A is negative. And that about sums up everything I need for the graph to equation, right? If I have a description to equation, that really kind of depends on what type of information I'm given in the problem. So I have a kind of a lot more written down here. So to find the midline, I'm going to use the min. If I'm given the min and max, then I know that the K is equal to Y max plus Y min divided by 2. If I have a midline point, then the K is just the Y coordinate from the midline point. And if we have a free point, we'll just choose to make that free point the midline point. So Y would be K. For the amplitude, if I have a max and min, the amplitude is just Y max minus Y min divided by 2. If I have an extreme point and a midline point, then it's just the distance between the extreme point and the midline point. And I didn't write down anything if I'm just told the amplitude in the problem because, like, right? If it just says the amplitude is 5 or something, like, do I really need to make a note of like what to do with the amplitude if it tells me the amplitude is 5? So I just skip that kind of a situation. For the period, so I said if I'm given mins and maxes, I know that 1/2 the period is the distance between the x from the maximum and the x from the minimum. If I have a midline point and the next extreme point, either a min or a max, it doesn't matter, it's 1/4 of a period is the distance between the midline point's x-coordinate, the extreme point's x-coordinate. And then if it's a min or max and then the second max or min after that, it's 3.5 periods is the distance between the min and max there. So this is just kind of like, I think these are the 3 types of problems we saw on the sheet, where those were the conditions. And then if I have a midline point or a free point, I use sine as my parent function, and the h is just the x-coordinate from that midline point. And I compare the type of midline points to determine the A. If I have maxes and mins, I'm going to use cosine as a parent function. So again, h is going to be the x-coordinate from either the min or the max. And if I use the minimum for h, then the a is negative. And if I use the maximum for h, then the a is positive. But that's kind of the notes that I would write for myself. Now, if you need more detail than that or want to include more formulas than that, obviously you can include more detail. But I think that's like a good way of organizing your stuff so that everything is where you need it to find it. You give yourself a little narrative of like how to do the problem. Obviously, if you want to include examples, specific examples with that kind of stuff, I think that's fine or whatever. And then I was going to remind you for Sunday, we have a Delta Math assignment. And then our problem set was 1 through 14 from last week, 15 from 15 to 26, which I think we did on Monday. We assigned that, and then worksheets 4 and 5 also came from Monday. So again, on worksheet 4, there's only 3 problems I need you to do. Worksheet 5 is only 2 problems I need you to do. And then the review is what I'm assigning today, but that'll all be part of Sunday's check. Everybody cool with what you need to be working on? Okay. If you have questions for me or want to go through anything or you're stuck on something or need clarification or want to work through an example or me to check anything, just come up and holler at me or whatever. I'll be here. Otherwise, I'm going to stop talking, get out of your way, and let you get going on stuff. Sound good? Okay.